Hello, Frizzle Frontier. In this mug, I have the names of the last 12 books I read, and they are going to be competing for which book gets to be reread, rewritten, or recycled. Starting off with round 1, we've got Bloodmarked, Thunderhead and The Toll, books 2 and 3 in the Sci-fi series, and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Well, I suppose the reread has to go to the only one of these that I actually finished, which is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So my expectations of what this book was and what this book actually was ended up being quite different. My expectations were this was a mystery novel and it was going to be fun. And also, an expectation that actually did come true was that it would have autism representation, because this book first came onto my radar because I was chatting with an acquaintance of mine who is autistic, and she said that this was the book that she felt most represented by. So here's what this book actually is. It's a literary fiction depressing family drama book. Is there a mystery? Well, the teeniest smidge, because at the beginning of the book a dog has died, and this is the neighbor's dog, and our protagonist is this little boy, and he cared about this dog and he wants to find who killed the dog, and that's a lot of his motivation throughout the book. But that isn't what the book actually ends up being about, because what it actually ends up being about is a lot of it is how he interacts with the world through an autistic lens, and a lot of it is his deteriorating home life. A little bit before the book starts, he's lost his mother, and this has been really hard on his father and has created all different drama. I did appreciate that this book has a plot twist that I did not see coming, and that was like the one bit of like, huh, this book did something interesting, but otherwise it was just like too literary fiction for my taste and not enough actual mystery. But of the 3 of these, I would reread this one. It was short and okay. I gave it 3 stars. And its book tone is uranium blue. Book tone is a reader personality test that I designed, and it breaks books down based on 14 different color types. Uranium blue means this book is character focused and intellectual. Then between the Scythe books and Bloodmarked, I think the rewrite gets to go to Bloodmarked. Bloodmarked is the sequel to Legendborn, which I read a little while ago, and I liked Legendborn quite a bit. But I had some problems with how much the book relied on long info dumps and giving us too much information about the world that wasn't actually relevant to the plot or character arcs. And then Bloodmarked took that critique and just bumped it up to 11 and didn't continue the awesome plotting and character arcs, which I loved in Legendborn. This series follows a teenager named Bree, and she's dealing with a lot of stuff. Her mother has recently died, she's recently gone off to college, and she's also discovering the secret society of mages that date back to the Round Table and are fighting monsters and kind of getting herself involved in all that. But like book 2, it felt like most of the scenes were so dead emotionally. Like, after every scene, I was kind of asking myself, what was the purpose of that scene? And nearly always the answer was, oh, it gave us an info dump about a topic that I don't care about. And occasionally the chapters would actually be moving the plot forward, but usually it was just giving info dumps on like the world building, the magic. That was most of it. The politics, but not the politics that were imminently relevant to the plot right now, but like other things that I didn't care about. Additionally, I felt like book 1 ended with a lot of really interesting conflicts that I was excited to see developed more and explored, and then they just like weren't that much. The rewrite of Bloodmarked would have to be a fairly substantive overhaul of a lot of the plot here, where I would like make a list of all those conflicts that book 1 was leaving hanging that are really intriguing, and then cut out every scene of Bloodmarked that doesn't actually build or develop one of those conflicts or give us a new interesting conflict. And then because we've like completely destroyed most of the structure of Bloodmarked by doing that, and then you'd have to rewrite the whole book. But I feel like the series has such potential, and I do think I'm gonna read book 3. Because I'm hoping that we're going to get back that spark of book 1 and improve upon it instead of making it worse like I did here in book 2. I gave Bloodmarked 2 stars. And its book tone is Xanthus Orange, which means it's intellectual and plot atmosphere focused. Then the recycle gets to go to Thunderhead and The Toll. Continuing on the trend of loving book 1 in the series and then the subsequent installments being like not as loved, here's that. This trilogy is in a futuristic world where humanity has solved death. There's no more of it. But then population control becomes an issue, so then there's this new career of people called scythes, whose job it is to kill people. And then in book 1, which I loved, we're following 2 teenagers as they become apprentice scythes and get introduced to this intriguing, corrupt organization. Book 2, Thunderhead, continues on that plot, where the apprentices have now graduated from their apprenticeship and are out in the world doing new, tricky things. The reason that I didn't like Thunderhead as much as the first one, Scythe, was because I felt like they had this wonderful character focus in Scythe, where we were really exploring how these people felt about their apprenticeship and what it meant to them. And then book 2 kind of threw that character focus out the window as it introduced like 7 new narrators. And everything was just kind of lost in this jumble where we were always jumping from people to people, and not like important people, but like random side characters that would introduce and then like kill off a chapter later. It became an ensemble cast kind of book where I cared about very few of the characters, and they got very little screen time. But I still gave Thunderhead 3 stars, because I liked it. And then we got to The Toll, and the problems that I had with book 2 got even worse in book 3. It was entirely unsatisfying and boring. Not only had we thrown the character focus out the window, we also threw the cohesive plot out of the window as we got like all of this weird braided timeline where we were always jumping back and forth as we jumped between characters too. It felt like the entire book was just there to build up to one kind of plot twist near the end of the book where you could go, whoa, this series did a thing, but didn't do like a compelling thing or tell a good story along the way, so I gave The Toll 2 stars. And the book tone is Xanthus Orange. For round 2, the books we're talking about are Blood Heir, By a Silver Thread, and The 7-Year Slip. Here we go. These are the kind of books I'm talking about. We finally got some ones that I liked. Let's start out with the bad news by giving the recycle to Blood Heir. Blood Heir is a book that's a spin-off of the Kate Daniel series. This is a series where it's like a post-apocalyptic world where sometimes there's magic in the world and then suddenly all the magic will turn off and all the technology will start working again, and then all the technology will turn off, your card no longer runs, but now you can do magic spells again, and on and off. Blood Heir follows a side character from the Kate Daniel series as she comes into her own. She has been given this quest to solve a murder, or else the prophecy says that like her family will die or something, I've forgotten. And was the murder solving interesting? No. And also this book had a thread where she was coming back to her hometown after being gone for many years. So then as she reunites with people, there's some sticky tension and conflict there. Was that done particularly well? I felt like no. And also we didn't get any of it until like over halfway into the book. But the crux of why I didn't like this book was that it felt like it spent so much of its page time info dumping the past history of the series. Not necessarily the information we needed to understand this spin-off book, but just like every single plot point that happened in the previous series that might even be kind of relevant. There we go, slam dunk, info dump. And then we didn't have much room for moving the plot forward. Every single chapter felt very much like, okay, we found a new thug and have a little fist fight with, and then we move on to the next chapter, we get a bunch of info dump about things, and then we have another fist fight. But it never felt like those fist fights were going anywhere or developing the character or the plot or anything. So it was very repetitive and boring, and I gave up on this book at 54%. I so wish I could have loved this one, but no. I gave Blood Heir 2 stars, and its book tone is vermilion red. Yeah, it still gets to be in the plot focus zone, even though the plot was pretty bad because, well, it didn't have exactly character focus or good atmosphere. Then we have By a Silver Thread versus The 7-Year Slip. And let's give the rewrite to The 7-Year Slip. This is a romance novel that's been making the rounds as many people's beloved book. And I did too. It's about a woman who's living in a semi-magic apartment that sometimes time travels. And then one day she walks into her apartment and she finds that it's time traveled, and she finds that suddenly she's 7 years in the past and someone else is living in the apartment then. And it's this hot guy. He has just moved into New York City. He wants to start up a cooking career, and they strike up a quick bond and start developing a relationship. But then the plot thickens as in her day job, she encounters the guy. And now he's 7 years older, and the relationship with him isn't so easy in the present. One of the things that I love in books is when we have a time jump. Between like a book and a series, there's suddenly like a 5-year gap and the characters are different. And it gives so much room for both a mystery of like, why are these characters different, and so much room to explore this new version of the character and how they got there. And this book managed to do that with its time travel elements. That despite no actual time jump taking place, you have past guy and present guy. And there's a 7-year time jump between them, and lots of things have happened in his life that have changed him as a person and made him react differently to our protagonist. So I was really excited when this started happening because it was so cool. And this is my rewrite because I think that the book didn't actually take it as far as it could go. Like, yes, we have this contrast between past him and future him, but we never really explored what events transformed him. And if I was rewriting this book, I would have put in some more scenes exploring all of that. I also felt like the character arc that the future version of him kind of goes on throughout this book was a little too rushed and a little cheap, and I would have loved to give more page time and development to that. And I think those could have paired really nicely to see, like, how did he become so jaded in the 7-year gap, and then as he's going through his character arc of becoming less jaded, we can relate those two. But I loved the 7-year slip. It's almost perfect. I gave it 4 stars, and its book tone is Resolution Blue. And our reread gets to go to By a Silver Thread. This book takes place in an urban fantasy / steampunk city, and we are following a fae changeling, and she is always right on the brink of magical death, and the only thing sustaining her is her daily dose of evil black magic from this blood mage. And then she's in servitude to that blood mage in order to pay for this magic. Then at the beginning of the book, the mage goes missing. And then the countdown begins, because if she doesn't find him, she's going to die. And then she goes on an adventure where she's on a quest to find pretty much her slave master, who she hates, and in the meantime getting tangled up in all of his evil enemies. And then also along the way, kind of discovering her independence, because this is the first time in her life that she's really had it, even if it wasn't necessarily the way that she wanted to get it. I loved this book. The pacing is absolutely on point, and our main character, this woman named Lola, is so compelling. She has so many rich inner conflicts and such good drive and motivation, where she really propels the story every step of the way. She's persistent without being annoying, and soft without being a pushover. I love this book. There's twists and turns, there's action, and there's quiet moments, and there's a beautiful romance on the side. I love it. I gave By a Silver Thread 5 stars. And its book tone is Thistle Purple. Then we get to round 3. The Fallen Empire series, books 1 through 4. Trail of Lightning and its sequel, Storm of Locusts. And An Inheritance of Magic. Ooh, what a round for 4 stars. How are we going to decide here? I have the most passion about a rewrite for the Fallen Empire series, so let's talk about that one first. This is a space opera series with a very slow burn romance at its center. Like, it literally takes 4 books for anything to happen. It takes place in a setting that's very Star Wars inspired, where the Empire has recently been overthrown by the rebels and the galaxy is in a little bit of disarray before the new government is getting started. We are just following a woman named Elisa who is fighting on the side of the rebellion, and she was kind of left at the end of the war on one side of the galaxy, and she wants to get to the other side to get home to her tween daughter. But that's tricky because the galaxy is full of pirates and her transportation isn't that reliable. Along the way, she's joined on her journey by various fun side characters, and the most important one is a cyborg, and he was fighting for the Empire during the war, so they have lots of friction between them, as they have very differing political views. But what I love about this series is while they have differing political views, it's never so different, and their values are similar enough that it's really fun to ship them. It's very good enemies to lovers in that way, because he's very gruff and she's very snarky, and she's always flirting at him and making jokes, and he's always just like, It's funny. I love it. But what I don't love, and what the rewrite for this series is it doesn't feel like the series was all that, like, planned out, where you could just, like, take out several books and, like, nothing would change. It's like every single plot feels like a side trip to something that isn't actually progressing the characters' goals are or what they need. Like, one book is they're just traveling from one point to another point, and then they get assaulted by pirates like 3 different times, and that's the book. And then the next book picks up and it's like, oh, we need to look at the library. Oh no, trouble in the library. And then they go around the city a little bit and like, that's book 2. And it feels like the series doesn't quite know where it's going or how many stops along the way it wants to take to get there, where most of the stops feel incredibly unimportant. Like, every episode's a little bit of a filler episode, and I'm enjoying the content because I'm shipping this couple so hard and it's entertaining and fun along the way. But that's my rewrite, is every book the characters need to have like some sort of emotional development, some sort of relationship development, and some sort of development in their quests. I gave these books on average 3.8 stars, and their book tone is Byzantium Purple. Then, An Inheritance of Magic versus Trail of Lightning, and let's recycle Trail of Lightning. But it's real close, guys. This is a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy. It's taking place on what used to be the Navajo reservation and has now transformed into like one of the few safe spaces left in the world, as everything else has devolved into chaos through various wars and environmental apocalypses. And with the apocalypse, there was this resurgence of magic also in the world, and we are following a woman named Maggie, and she has inherited some magic powers, and her powers are very death and destruction themed, and before the book starts, she was an apprentice slash sidekick to this demigod guy who she definitely hero worshipped, but didn't treat her super well, and they were going around slaying monsters, because with the rise of magic in the world, there's also been a rise of monsters. But then as this book starts, she's recently been abandoned by this demigod guy who she was following around, and now she's kind of a freelance monster hunter. But she's struggling with it, she's struggling emotionally, she's lonely. And then she gets put on the trail of this really powerful monster, and she decides she needs some help to hunt it down, and she gets a new sidekick whose name is Kai, who also has some powers, and she is very grumpy, gruff, I will murder you. And he is very happy, sunshine, everyone's friends here, right? And it's a very fun dynamic, and there's a little bit of a romance with them, but not a lot. And it's following them as they're tracking down this monster and also encountering various gods and friends and conflicts along the way. And you know what? I loved this book. I didn't love it as much as the other one, so it gets to be recycled. But I felt like this book was so compelling and raw and emotional, where we were really getting into the head of our protagonist Maggie and seeing as she kind of readjusts to the concept of having friends. I gave Trail of Lightning 4 stars. And its book tone is anchor gray, which is emotional but a pretty good balance of plot, character, and atmosphere focused. Then the reread gets to go to An Inheritance of Magic. This is an urban fantasy book about a guy who is very lonely, and he's got a little bit of magic training, and he's doing all that he can with it. He's making little magic doodads, and he's pushing himself as much as he can. He's also kind of struggling to make ends meet financially, and also especially struggling to balance his financial concerns and also spending time developing his magic. Then one day he encounters the world of all the other magic users, because it turns out most of the people who use magic in this world are incredibly rich and part of these very posh dynasties of magic. And he starts getting caught in their spiderweb traps and learning more about the magic world as he goes and finding his own place in it. And this book especially, and this author in general, because I've read quite a few other books by him, really just nails a hard magic system in an urban fantasy setting. Sometimes I chafe at hard magic systems because I feel like too much page time is devoted to like info dumps that I don't care about, and the magic becomes boring because it's like over explained and over scienced and just like it feels more like a lecture than like a fun thing. But this one, it always managed to feel like a fun thing while also thoroughly explaining the rules and the types and everything going on. And I feel like a lot of that is the way that we learn about it is alongside of our protagonist. That as he's learning more about the world and the magic, we are learning right along with him. And I'm invested in every single magic breakthrough he has, because as he's learning about the magic and we're learning about the magic, he's getting better at it, and then that's making things happen in the plot. So every info dump of how the magic works directly correlates to a breakthrough happening in the plot and character arcs. This book had me hooked all the way through, and I'm very excited for the sequel. I gave An Inheritance of Magic 4 stars, and its book tone is Celadon Green. Then, before we get to round 4, the final round, let's talk about our dishonorable mentions for the day. These are books that I gave up on so quickly that I feel like I can't review them fully. The first one gets to be The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I gave up on this one because it was incredibly episodic and boring. It was very cozy in the way that there's like no stakes or conflicts, and very like found family in the way that we're never focusing on one person, but just like the entire extended family all together. The next dishonorable mention is Old Man's War. And I gave up on this one because the protagonist was obnoxious, the writing was sexist, and the plot was boring. Okay, then round 4. We have The Good, the Bad, and the Undead, Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, and The Vampires of El Norte. Oh, I loved all of these! How am I supposed to choose what to recycle? Okay, but the easiest decision first is definitely rereading Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. So this and the first book in the series were my top reads of 2023. I'm obsessed with these so much. These books take place in a magical early 1900s following Professor Emily Wilde, and she studies fairies. And she's really good at studying fairies. She knows them inside and out. She's the top of her field, but her big weakness is that she's really bad at social situations, at relating to people, at understanding them, and making friends. So of course, these books are about her studying fairies and also making friends. And they're very intellectually cozy kind of books. Where you're reading her journal entry, it reminds me a lot of a cozier version of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is also a comparison that I've seen the author make about these books. Where as you're learning about Emily and her adventures, you're also learning a lot about her scholarship and the discoveries she's making and the things that she knows about fairies. One of the other characters in this series is Professor Wendell Bambleby, her academic rival, who has a big crush on her, even though she hasn't quite noticed it yet. And then you're following them and her magical dog as they hunt down some fairies. Book 1, I loved and I was obsessed with. Book 2 was somehow even better. Book 1, I feel like the only complaint I would have about it is that its plot is sometimes a little deconstructed. It's not quite coherent or cohesive all the time. It's sometimes hard to tell exactly where the book is going. But in book 2, it's got a much better plot engine. At the end of book 1, Emily and Wendell kind of gained a quest together, and then book 2 is about them going off and completing that quest. And it's much more focused and streamlined and has all of the fun bits of book 1 while also improving upon it. And like, it's so good. I gave Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands 5 stars. And its book tone is uranium blue. Okay, then, The Good, the Bad, and the Undead versus The Vampires of El Norte. These books are both so good that I can't think of a way to rewrite either of them. How am I even supposed to recycle them? No, we're gonna make this decision. We're gonna relegate one of these to recycling. You know what? Whatever. We're just gonna reread everything. I am here today for positivity, and I don't want to be forced to tell you about what I didn't like about either of these books, because I love them both. And I just want to gush about how awesome all these books were to you. The Good, the Bad, and the Undead is book 2 in the Hollow series, an urban fantasy chronicling the adventures of a witch named Rachel. In this book, Rachel is kind of a freelance bounty hunter, and she's living in a abandoned church with her roommate, a vampire who's trying very hard to kind of maintain her don't drink human blood sobriety. And in this book, she takes a case that leads her onto the trail of like a magical serial killer who is kind of above her weight class. And she ends up getting into a lot of trouble because of that. In the past, she's had various deals with demons that are coming back to bite her and haunt her in this book and getting her into even more trouble. She's also having trouble with her boyfriend, who is a very good guy, but he's become kind of addicted to summoning demons, and it's going to end messily one of these days. And I loved this book. I loved the voice. It's that first person charm that I love, where the protagonist and our narrator has so much personality and it's always becoming plot relevant, where she's very snarky but never in an over-the-top, okay, now you're annoying way. And I've been searching for so long to find a series that could scratch my Dresden Files itch, and I was scared away from this one for a little bit because of the covers, but they just come from the early 2000s craze where all female-led urban fantasy had covers like this, but it's not necessarily representative of the contents of the book. Now, I'm not as hooked on this one as Dresden Files yet, but I could see myself becoming so, and I'm very excited to continue on with this series and see what messes she gets into next. I gave The Good, the Bad, and the Undead 4 stars, and its book tone is Byzantium Purple. Then, last but not least, we get to Vampires of El Norte. This is a Western novel with romance and a teensy bit of horror elements mixed in. We are following some fun characters in 1840s Mexico. When they were teenagers, Nena and Nestor had a romance budding, but then Nena gets attacked by a vampire. Nestor, thinking that she died, runs away because he doesn't want to be blamed for it. Then as the book starts off, many years later they're both grown up. It turns out Nena never died, and she's incredibly salty that Nestor, her love, abandoned her. Nestor has been, for years, grieving his love because he thought she was dead. And then they get reunited as the vampires are coming back in force and attacking people, and also the Yankees are invading. And definitely the core of this book is them reuniting and their romance, and it was done so well. There was so much beautiful conflict between them, and both of them wrestling with their feelings and trying to decide if they still wanted to be with the other one and how they could make this work after their emotions were so raw from so many years of being separated. And also there's a good fast pace being kept up because there are high stakes with all of these things hunting them out in the desert. It's absolutely beautifully constructed, and if you're looking for a Western romance with supernatural elements, I would highly recommend it. I gave The Vampires of El Norte 4 stars, and its book tone is Jade Green. And that's the last 14 books that I read. If you liked watching this video, I think you'll love watching this one next.